Well, welcome everyone to the first ever virtual Capstone Design Conference. My name is Keith Stanfill, and I'm the Edwards Assistant Dean and Director of Integrated Engineering Design at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I'm really pleased to welcome you all today. I'm going to give you just a little brief history of the Capstone Design Conference, and I'm going to turn it over to our co-chair, Amy Hortop, to give you more information about the run of the day today. So back in 1994, Brigham Young University, Bob Todd, Carl Sorensen, and Spencer Magleby ran a kind of a it was a brand new thing. They did a big benchmarking study of all the capstone design programs nationwide, ran a big survey. They hosted a conference in 1994 on advances in capstone education, and shared those practices. Kind of went dormant for over a decade. In the summer of, I think it was 2006, Jack Zabel, who was at the University of Colorado, Boulder, he was an ex-IBMer, big time into benchmarking, reached out to a number of capstone instructors around the country to invite them to Boulder for a little summit. So Jeff Gillis from Seattle University, myself, I was at University of Florida, Mark Steiner from Rensselaer Polytechnic, and Spencer Magleby from BYU. And we met that summer with Jack and came to the realization, we need a conference. We should get everybody together and do this. This is really cool. So conference went from concept to implementation in a year. So in 2007, we hosted the first Capstone Design Conference in UC Boulder. 3 years later, we had the second conference. We did that one also at UC Boulder. 2012, we had the conference at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And then in 14 and 16, we ran the conference at the Ohio State University. And then in 2018, we're at RIT in Rochester, New York. So we were really excited about being at the University of Texas, Dallas for June this year, but something got in the way of that session. But anyway, this conference planning team has been together, some of us since the very beginning, and it's really been a pleasure working with this incredible group of professionals. And we're all volunteering our time and love what we do, and love sharing at the conference. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Amy Hortop, my co-chair for the 2021 conference, and she's going to give you the run of the day and then introduce Jay Goldberg.
Hello, everyone. I am Amy Hortop, a lecturer in the College of Engineering at the University of Michigan. And I'd like to echo Keith's comments and welcome you all here today. We are super thrilled to see so many of you interested in joining our virtual conference today. And we really appreciate your participation. It's really you, this larger capstone community, that makes the in-person conference that we have every 2 years really great to take part in. So again, thank you for joining us today. We know the next few hours are not the same as the conversations and discussions that we would normally have at our conference, but we do hope that this virtual conference will be a start for further conversations or Zoom calls this summer. These sessions today will be recorded, and the notes that are being scribed during the sessions will also be posted to our Capstone Conference website following today's conference. We also hope that some of these discussions will move over to our Slack channel. So following our conference today, an email will go out with information on how you can jump down to our Slack channel if you're not Slacked out. And you can also, at that point, give us some feedback on the conference today through some surveys. And those surveys will help drive some of the topics that we might present next year at our in-person conference. So I would also like to thank our OC for putting this together this summer. We pivoted quickly, and this group is so great to work with. It's been a lot of fun. And with that, I'd like to turn it over now to Jay Goldberg from the Marquette University to kick things off for Capstone 101.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Amy. Welcome to Capstone 101. I'm Jay Goldberg. I'm the director of the Healthcare Technologies Management Program at Marquette University and the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm also a clinical professor of biomedical engineering there. And I've been teaching capstone design for, this will be in the fall, be my 21st year doing it. So first, before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that the way we're going to work this is so if you have questions or comments, we're going to ask you to submit them via the chat feature. I think most people are familiar with how to use it. There's a button at the bottom where you click on that and you can enter a comment, or via a Google Doc that we have set up, and there should be a link there. It is there, I see it there, so that you can submit it either way, either through the chat or via the Google Doc. Reminder, this session is called Capstone 101 because it's really pretty much designed for new instructors. New could be 0 years of experience, could be 2 years, for whatever, but fairly new instructors that might have some questions about how to do things. And so what we like to do is give priority to those new instructors in terms of asking questions. Doesn't mean that if you have a question and you're a veteran instructor, you can't, but let's just give priority to them. And then once we've answered those questions, we can move on to questions from the bigger group. I also want to mention, I know that we have, well, I'm guessing that we have a lot of veteran instructors. So we'd like you to share some of your wisdom and advice with the new instructors too. Once all the panelists have we've gone through, they've responded to some of the main questions. Okay, the last thing I want to mention here then is also, I was thinking the other day, if I was a new instructor, not only do I have to struggle with how do I figure out how to teach the course, but now I have these new pandemic related restrictions. That's hard enough even for veteran instructors. So there may be some questions related to how are people dealing with the pandemic? How are they building teamwork, those kinds of things. I just want to remind you that that's kind of the theme of the rest of the sessions today. So if you have questions that are related to how to deal with some of the restrictions caused by the pandemic, keep in mind that the later there's the session on scoping projects, developing teamwork, having difficult discussions, things like that. We'll kind of focus on those. So you might want to save those pandemic related type questions for the later session, but if you want to ask them here, that's okay too. So before we get started, and before I make any more assumptions, I'd like to conduct a poll. So if all we have about 150 participants, if all of you could respond to the poll, let's see, there's the poll. I hope you can see it. Can everybody see the poll? Nobody's nodding their head. Can you see the poll? Uh-oh. Oh, launch poll. Okay, here we go. Can you see the poll now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so I'll give everybody a minute to respond. We just want to get a feel for who's in our audience here. Basically, how long you've been teaching capstone design. We've got 87% voted, 88%, 89. Okay, we want to wait another about half a minute here, and then hopefully we'll have everybody or close to everybody. Okay, so we have about 20% have not taught this course, 25% are 1 to 2, 26% 3 to 5 years, 10% 6 to 10 years, and 19% grade 11 plus. Great. Okay, good. That gives us an idea of where our audience is. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing now. Oh, okay, hang on a second. There we go. Okay, now, I would like to now move on to our panelists. We have some questions that we sent to everybody, and we got several responses back. And so what I'd like to do is have the panelists each talk a little bit about themselves. They'll give a little bit of their background and answer a few questions regarding their experience with capstone design and that kind of thing. So first, we have Susanna Howe from Smith College. So Susanna, would you like to give a little bit of your background?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Susanna Howe. I teach at Smith College, which is in Western Massachusetts. It's a small liberal arts college with an engineering program. And we have a general engineering degree. It's engineering, Bachelor of Science in Engineering Science. And I have been teaching the Capstone design course at Smith since 2003. So I'm entering year 17, I guess, of teaching Capstone. And I absolutely love it. As I said, it's an engineering science degree. So we have projects across a wide range of engineering disciplines, all happening within the same Capstone umbrella. We do almost exclusively industry and government sponsored projects. I've done a small handful of entrepreneurial projects over the years, but almost all of the rest of them are externally sponsored by industry and government.
Great. What one thing would you wish you would have known before you started teaching capstone design?
All right, so I guess this message especially goes out to the people who are very new at teaching capstone. Something that I wish I knew that I definitely learned more over the years is how different capstone design courses are from many other typical engineering courses. There's so much uncertainty in capstone design. Projects are open-ended. You're dealing with outside sponsors. You're probably not a technical expert in every single project that you're helping to coach. Things change along the way, and I had come in sort of expecting to have a very structured class, and I would teach very structured content, and it would go in a usual manner. And it took me a couple of years to learn to just let go. And when I finally did, that helped things a lot. And so just be willing to roll with the chaos. And I would say having really embraced that, the pandemic, okay, so we have a pandemic, we'll roll with that too. It's just yet another thing happening to capstone design. But that's something that I wish I'd known early, just to give myself permission to let go. It's all going to work out in the end.
Great, thank you for that sage advice. That's great. Renee Rogi's next, and she is from Hulman University.
Yes, thanks. So welcome everyone. So Renee Rogi from Biomedical Engineering at Hulman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute, Indiana. Courses that I teach and design, just biomedical engineering students, average about 12 teams a year with 3 to 4 students working on projects, half from industry, half from assistive technology type projects, just in case you're curious for how that kind of matches up. The thing I wish I'd known, which I think Jay's about to ask me, I came into capstone design with this idea of product development model, like the product, and I thought I knew what success might look like. And so what I've learned over time is that the student is more of the product than the actual thing that they may make. And I think if I had realized that earlier, that the student as a product was what I was looking at, I think things would have gone a little smoother in the beginning. So I like to think of there's a lot of opportunities in a capstone experience more than just a process or a product itself.
Great, good point. Thank you. And then our third panelist is who you've met already, Amy Hortop from University of Michigan.
So hello again. As mentioned, I am in the College of Engineering at the University of Michigan. And I should mention that in the College of Engineering, the capstone is not centralized. So every department has their own version of what counts as a capstone. So I've had about 6 years experience now in some aspect of coordinating and teaching a capstone design course. And that started in mechanical engineering with their undergraduate capstone course. It's taught both semesters, about 120 to 140 undergraduates every semester. The projects are a mix between industry, community, faculty, student-initiated projects. So that's where I started out. And then now I've transitioned into the Integrative Systems and Design Division in the College of Engineering, where I coordinate a master's level capstone course and also co-teach another version of the undergraduate mechanical engineering capstone course that is analytical product development. So it's a little bit more multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary for that capstone experience.
Great. And what one thing do you wish you knew before you started teaching capstone design?
I wish I would have known right from the beginning just how far a little bit of coaching of the project sponsors would go in terms of helping out the overall project experience for students. So we spend a lot of time in the classroom developing our students and teaching our students. And I learned that if I spend a little bit of time at the front end working with our project sponsors, regardless of whether they're from the community or industry or faculty, just getting them all on the same page about what we're looking for the students to be able to help them out. They did a lot of the work throughout the semester to kind of keep them on track and keep them going towards the same learning goals.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so with those introductions, I'd like to move on to some of the questions there was a survey sent to everybody who was registered for this session, and questions that were asked by some of the newer instructors tended to fall in two categories. One of them had to do with projects, the other had to do with teams and teamwork. So I'd like to ask them, each of our panelists, to respond to these questions, and I've gone through and kind of refined them and grouped them together. So there's one of the quite big questions was how do you solicit ideas for your projects? And not so much, well, partly how, but like where, who, what, and I know that depends on the types of projects that you have, but how would you solicit them and what types of projects do you look for? So Susanna, why don't you kick this off?
Sure, I'll kick this off. And I guess I'll give two answers to this. The Smith Engineering program is reasonably new. I taught the first group of seniors when I came in 2003. So at that point, we had no alums from our engineering program. Currently, I'm now able to tap into alums now this many years out, and they are a great source of places to find projects, especially those who either are new in their career and have a manager who's very enthusiastic and wants to hire more people like them, or people who are further along in their careers and actually now have the sort of level of expertise in whatever company they're working in to decide they want to sponsor a project. So alums are a great place. But if you're in a new program that is just starting up and doesn't have alums, then the question is, what do you turn to? And one easy place to do is just whatever industry or government organizations you have around you. And I'm speaking about this as someone who's based in Western Massachusetts, which is not the hotbed of engineering industry. And yet we were able to find, some options, some local groups, Department of Public Works in the local town, things like that. You sort of patch it all together, and it does start to grow over time. But tapping into alums of both the engineering program as well as the institution as a whole, and also Board of Trustees members often have connections. And just sort of everywhere you go, trying to find different connections.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Renee.
I echo a lot of what Susanna said. I would add to that career services. So places that come and recruit at your school, they are there for a reason. So they want to support your programs. And that was a really valuable resource for me. I was in a similar boat as Susanna, a new program, the first year of students. So I didn't have a lot of alumni to go to. Now that's a great resource. But at the beginning, it was find those local people, local connections, and the career services was really, really helpful.
Great, thank you. Amy, anything to add?
The only thing I would add is that the one place that I've been very fortunate to have projects from industry come from students. So students are out there for the summer, they're interning someplace. And if you send a quick notice to students over the summer saying, hey, how's it going? Do you have any projects you think your supervisor might want to continue in a capstone course? We've had projects come in that way.
Great, okay. And before we move on, I just want to add something. At Marquette University, one of the things we do is we talk with our industrial advisory board members, because a lot of them, each department has an industrial advisory board. They understand what we're trying to accomplish with our capstone program, and sometimes they can be a really good source of projects. Also, I think Renee, you mentioned career services. We have a group that's just dedicated to co-ops and internships, and they're great at they're all about developing relationships with companies. So if you can tap into their network, that's another potential source. And the last thing I'll mention is now this doesn't, if you're creating a brand new program that didn't exist, this isn't going to help. But if you're a new instructor taking over for someone who had been teaching the class, I talked to a lot of past sponsors. We've had sponsors that every year want to do a project, and they're happy customers and they're glad to come back. So that's another potential source. So even if you didn't teach the class when they were sponsoring it, you might want to find out from your predecessors, what companies sponsored courses when they were teaching the course, and maybe follow up with that and try to continue those relationships. Okay, great. All right, the next question would be, a very good question. Somebody wanted to know, when you're asking for project descriptions from companies or from anybody, should they be vague, or should they be very specific? What's your opinion? What have you found works best? Let's reverse the order. Let's go with Amy first this time.
Lucky me. So the way that I handle this typically was to go err on the side of being more specific. So get as much detail as I could about what they were looking for, just to manage expectations, but always thinking and keeping in mind that we needed to be flexible throughout the semester regardless. So the more structure, the more information that I could provide students in some ways, the better, or at least have it in my back pocket so I knew what the employer was looking for, even if we want to open up the problem to students and say, generally this is what you're doing, and not have them locked into certain ideas. That was one way to handle it. But me personally, as the person managing those projects, I wanted to have more information rather than less, knowing that I could be more flexible.
Okay, great. Thanks. Renee.
That is a fantastic question. For me, talking with the potential clients for the projects, I did, like Amy was saying, want a lot of information, but I also wanted to make sure that they weren't so locked into a potential solution that there was no room for flexibility for the students. So in sourcing those projects, that's kind of my red flag, is if a client seems to be like, they really just want a crew to make this thing, like, oh, that doesn't really fit our what the students need. They need those boundaries to be able to do what they want creatively. So I like information. I want to make sure that it's not turning into a research project, that there is a design aspect to the project. So kind of feeling out the boundaries, but leaving enough for students to do a user needs investigation. I don't like it to be something where they're given the problem statement. I like for them to struggle a little bit with what is the real need here and what is the problem. So it's a delicate balance. But those were my red flags.
Right. Okay, good. Thanks. Susanna.
Yeah, so I'll pick up on a comment that I saw came in the chat about having stretch goals. And this is something that I find works really well, is thinking about the capstone project scope like an onion, and it has multiple layers to it. And so there's this core of the onion that you make sure you want to get done, and then you can frame out a couple different sort of goals beyond that, because things always come up in capstone and you never really know. So I like to try to scope projects a little bit bigger than I think students can do, but talk with the client and know what is the absolute baseline. And we make sure that that is something that is very clearly articulated. Another thing that I've found is helpful in thinking about how to scope a project is if I can provide students with some milestones along the way. So they're not, the goal is not just whatever they're delivering at the end of the course, but it's a couple things along the way. That helps move them in a forward direction and gives them some sense of accomplishment as they're moving forward. And also each one of those is a good check-in point with the sponsor. And then I guess the third thing I'll note is that when I started at Smith, I inherited some, I wouldn't even call them projects, I would say project connections in my very first year. And I got maybe 2 sentences of description from these sponsors. And that semester, my students spent the entire fall just trying to figure out what this project was. And that was it wasn't a good use of their time at all. So over the years, I've morphed to about a 4 or 5 page project description. It's not nearly as much information as the students would like to have. It's plenty of information to get them started. And it's something that I've worked back and forth with the sponsor on. So that's sort of my guideline, something on the order of 4 to 5 pages that describes various components of the project.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to ask, there's a question that I noticed in the chat room, and maybe you can all answer it very quickly, but for your projects, somebody's got to pay for prototypes, right? So like if they're industry sponsored, what's your average, sponsorship? What do projects actually cost? Actually was the question. What do you find is like the average cost for a project? Susanna, go ahead. If you can throw out a rough idea.
Yeah, so at Smith, we have a sliding scale. For big companies, we charge $15,000 a year, which for a team of 4 students over the course of the year. But it slides all the way down to nothing, because we do some pro bono projects for the city locally, for instance. Average project for us, it really varies. Maybe a couple $1,000s, depending on how much travel the students do, how much hardware they need to buy, how much software they need to buy, what kind of work is necessary for the project. So it's really all over the place. I've had projects cost as much as $10,000 or $12,000 because we had really expensive prototyping or we had to buy a big piece of equipment for it. But I would say a really broad range. That said, I did a survey in 2015, that's the most recent one, I think, of capstone programs across the country in the US. And there are data up on CD Hub from that. The average cost or average amount that sponsors pay across the country, it's much lower than that. It's more like $2,000 to $3,000. And average projects are costing maybe $1,000 or so to run. But there are certainly a number of programs that we consider outlier programs that are charging in the order of $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000, even $20,000. It just sort of depends on how you run your capstone course.
Right. Okay. And you brought up something that I want to mention. I hope it's okay with you. But so Susanna has been an author on several publications that she's been doing these surveys every 10 years, I think. So you've done 3 of them so far. And I think that those surveys will answer a lot of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat area regarding project cost and do you have a mentor and that kind of stuff, because the survey really shows what people are doing around the country and how it's changed every 10 years. So I would refer people, maybe we can put up a link maybe on the Google Doc to how to access those papers about the survey. Okay, that would be a big help. So I'm going to move on then. To another topic here, and that would be teams. And there's a lot of interest in that people want to know. Some of the newer instructors are asking, how do you form teams? What factors do you consider? So those 2 questions, we'll go to Renee on that one.
My general strategy that has evolved over time is to allow students to provide, and I know this is controversial, to provide a little bit of input on, they put a preference in. Do they prefer to work with the team of their choice or on the project of their choice? And if they put project first, they know that they get priority on the project. Like that's, we've seen a lot of success for teams that are clustered around the project goal rather than the team. If a team is insistent that they want to be on their team, say, or have their friends or whoever they're used to working with, they have to get together and prioritize the projects that they would like to work on, recognizing that the project takes precedence. So if an individual wants projects, they should go with projects. And that's really how it's evolved and works out pretty well for us. Our students know each other really well though, so they're in lots of classes with each other over the 4 years, so they've kind of fallen into habits. We give them all the lectures about the dangers and perils of teaming with their friends and their roommates, but we do let them make those choices.
Yeah. Okay, Amy?
Similar answer to what Renee has mentioned. In mechanical engineering, we also had given students the choice between making preferences towards the project that they were interested in or whether they wanted to work with a team. And similarly, the students had gotten to know each other through the sequence of design courses that they take together at different times. So that did work really well. In the current capstone course that I'm teaching, it's the students generate their own project ideas for analytical product design. And so in this case, it's completely team selection, like the team picks itself. But what we do is give a survey out at the start of the semester, basically getting to know the students, what their interests are, a little bit about what their work habits might be. So students kind of know that going into it, a little bit about their teammates before they're actually forming their teams.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Sorry for my phone ringing in the background. Susanna.
So the strategies I've used for about the past 10 years, which I have been really happy with, is I give every student 20 points and they can assign points in favor of projects or against projects or in favor of people or against people, but they only have 20 points. And that allows them to prioritize what's most important and communicate clearly to me. And I find I've been able to give every student either their first or second choice almost all the times. And it also keeps me from having to put teams together that may have a really bad team dynamic that I just wouldn't have known about. And I know this is a bit controversial because in industry, you may or may not get a choice of people that you work with, but you might in a case if you know a manager. And so I think it's not totally unrealistic. And I have known from experience that if you have a really bad capstone team in terms of dynamics, and we'll talk about this more this afternoon, it can really spoil the whole capstone experience for that team and even for the rest of the class. So I try really hard to make teams that will work well together for everybody.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you. This one, we could talk about for an hour about this next topic, but the question is, how do you define success in teams? So what is a successful team? What does that mean? And how does it compare to the way your students might define success? And then how would you assess or measure this? And that one is, you can take a class in that. But so let's focus on the how do you define success in teams? Susanna, why don't you start with this one?
I guess my short way of saying it is the team, as soon as I'm not needed anymore, if I've absoluted myself, then my team is doing really well, because they don't need any coaching, they don't need the same kind of guidance, and they really have owned their own experience. And that's really exciting when that can happen. So in my mind, that's a very successful team. Jay, I will point out we're getting a couple chat questions about diversity and inclusion in creating teams. So we should definitely talk about that as well.
Okay, great. We'll go to those questions next. Renee, your response to the definition of success?
I think the growth of the team is something that, in meeting with the teams throughout the year, it's something that you kind of get a feel for. What Susanna's saying, where you're almost just peripheral to the team, you're observing more than you're doing anything, is great. It's interesting to think of what students define as success, though. I think they're still very much on the product, the thing at the end, whether it's the design of a process or a product. I think they see that as success. I don't necessarily buy that. I think there's a lot of successful teams and a lot of successful projects that don't end up with a good prototype, but boy, was the learning and the growth of that team. It happened, and they're ready to go into industry. You're ready to set them free on the world and not worry about it. That's kind of my informal definition of success. As far as assessment of it, there are a lot of resources out there on evaluating the growth of teams and how teams change over time. So we can share some of those resources with you if you're interested.
Great, thanks. Amy.
I would agree both with Susanna and Renee's comments. When the team is able to function very well on their own, when they're able to communicate well with one another and communicate with me what's going on, what they need, what they don't need, all of that points to success. I would agree with Renee that a lot of times the students will start out by thinking that success is based on the thing that they're building or the prototype that they're finishing. But I've been really surprised and happily surprised at the end of the semester when you ask students to sort of reflect on their experience throughout the entire capstone, that a lot of times some of the team stuff is what comes up, that they realize that they learned a lot about how to talk to each other within their team, or how to not just delegate work to other people, but actually work together as a team to figure out who should best do things or get things done. So that pops up at the end as well.
Right, okay, thank you. So you're all pointing out some very important things that students learn that aren't necessarily in the textbook. As we all know, a lot of this learning goes on outside of the classroom when they're interacting with each other. And I just want to mention one thing that, and Suzanne, I think one of your surveys may have addressed this, but there are some programs that would say, the prototype, that's how we define success. I just want to remind people that, there's a lot to learn in failure. And when we're trying to get students to be more innovative, we have to tolerate failure. So we can't penalize them because a prototype didn't work. If it didn't work because they didn't put the time into it, that's one thing. But if it didn't work, but they tried several approaches and they're learning from each one, and they say, oh, we're running out of time. If we had more time, we would do this, this, and this, make these changes. That to me demonstrates a really good understanding of their design. And to me, that's almost as important as, I would say it is as important, maybe more important than having an actual functional prototype at the end. So, okay, having said that, we are getting some questions regarding diversity and inclusion. So what do each of you do? What kind of advice do you have in terms of when you're forming teams to make sure that they're diverse teams and that people are being included? What do you have any formal procedures, or how do you address that? And Amy, let's start with you.
Sure. So we definitely do a number of times throughout the semester. We'll check in with students doing like the peer evaluations. We'll use the software CatMe or something similar to try to check in with students and give them a forum to be able to talk about their teams without everyone from the team seeing it if they need that. We've also, in different courses that I've taught, brought in special people from outside to talk about different things. So even if the teams are already formed, we do talk to them about different conflict styles and being able to recognize those, or being able to, we've brought people in about cultural awareness or social intelligence, just some of these other bigger topics that, again, aren't typically covered in a traditional classroom, but we do try to include and talk about in our team-based project classes.
Okay, Renee?
I would start by saying that diversity of teams and team development does not start in capstone design, that this is something that our program works on as a whole, trying to figure out how to, that they're not being introduced to a teaming environment for the first time in capstone design, because then you end up with a lot more issues to help them with their growth. So one of the things we've implemented in the last couple of years, kind of informally, just to figure out, like, it's hard to ask students to have some of these conversations, like, I see, student X excluding student Y for whatever reason. And if that's happening behind the scenes and students hide that from the instructors, that's not good. Like, we want to be able to help, right? If something's happening, keeping it from us doesn't help us with that student's growth. So we started implementing this thing called a shining star, or an on the other side is kind of an opportunity for improvement. So this person needs some professional intervention, and for what reason? And those are anonymous, and they are not part of their grade. It's just, we want to know who deserves a shout out, like who should at the end of the year or at the end of the quarter has been an awesome teammate and why. And then on the other side, who needs a little bit of help, and how might we help them, and what situations did you identify that we need to intervene on? And we found that to be actually very successful. And then you can pull in an advisor or whoever has worked with them in the past to try and make those connections and to improve that student's professional growth. Because it's beyond just capstone design. You want to make sure they're ready for the world when they graduate. So.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Susanna.
I'm not sure I have a whole lot more to add about working with teams through the year, because I think that hands-on and very close connected approach works really well, and it is important to be aware of all the way along. In terms of forming teams and trying to have teams that are as diverse and inclusive as possible, for me at Smith, our program is really small, and we have students interested in a lot of different areas, and they won't necessarily be interested in all of the projects that I'm offering. So I have a lot of constraints already. So I don't really try to diversify the teams. I really focus more on student preference in terms of projects and people. Also, Smith is a women's college, so we have largely women and non-binary, and so that's a little trickier as it is. So it's not something that I feel like I can do it at a small scale, but I would imagine that at a larger program, there'd be some room to include yet another axis in trying to develop teams.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think the last question related to teams that we'll cover before we move on to the next section would be, so I'll read the question is, first-time instructors always ask about the balance between hand-holding, rowing the boat to avoid them getting off course versus being hands-off, and sending the team adrift to allow for independence and ownership. So the question is, how involved should I be? So if you think about that for a minute, and Susanna, maybe you want to start with that one.
I guess the place that I'll start this is related to length of time of capstone. So based on the survey work that I've done, it used to be that more capstone courses were a semester long, and I've seen a change over the past 20 years where capstone courses are now becoming more of a 2-semester long or two quarters long. And I think that makes a difference because it allows a little more space for students to try things on their own. And ultimately for me, I really feel that the fall semester is an opportunity for students to flail around about a bit. And I think that's it sounds like not supporting them, but in fact, by letting them flail, letting them explore, but being there in the background, I think that's really valuable. And then because I have 2 semesters, that allows them the time over between the semesters and turning into the second to really start to shift things where they take ownership of the project. And that's what I'd really like to see them do. If it were limited to just a semester, I would probably feel like I had to handhold more. And I think the experience that students would get would not be as strong.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, Renee.
Yeah, I think that is consistent with what I think. I would add that I do have some out of bounds markers, right? So if a student starts not showing up to team meetings, or there's some disturbing behaviors that you start to see a pattern of, then there's the interventions that are much quicker. But I do like to loosen the reins a little bit and see where they go, because they can be super creative and you don't want to constrain their thinking. But if you problematic behavior, I think deserves some quicker intervention. And sometimes if you know the students really well from the past, you may tighten that in or loosen it up a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Amy.
Yeah, I like the way that Renee put that, the out of bounds. That's a good way to think about it. So all the capstone experiences I've had at U of M have been single semester capstones. So similar to what Susanna said, I do definitely feel that at the beginning of the semester, there's definitely more hand-holding to make sure that things get going well. And then definitely we let them go, and any of the capstone experiences that I've had, to Renee's point, to just see what they do, because a lot of times we have a certain thing in mind of what we think that they'll get to or where they could go, but they blow us away. Like they really are super creative and just remarkable students. So it's really great to just see what they end up with.
Great. Okay, good. All right, so I just like to add one thing regarding that topic. It's a little bit, it's related. It could be somewhat controversial, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. And the question is, okay, how involved should a faculty member be? When the issue of intellectual property comes up in a project, in a senior design project, my feeling is that capstone design is about student design. It's not about student faculty design. So we really discourage our faculty members from sharing intellectual property, or actually, we don't want them to design the product, the device, the prototype with the students. That's not what this is about. Faculty members are supposed to provide guidance, motivation, pep talks, things like that. But when we see a patent that includes faculty and students, that that tells me that perhaps that the faculty member has perhaps done more of their share, has done too much design work for the with the students, and that's not really what these projects are about. You know, to be listed as an inventor, you have to make an inventive contribution, and patent attorneys will tell you, you know, what an inventive contribution is. And if you do that, I think we're overstepping our bounds if we do that. At Texas A&M and the Ohio State University, their websites, at least as a few years ago, they had some guidelines on faculty involvement, and they clearly say that faculty should not, you know, be designing the product with the students. They should allow the students the freedom to be creative. So that's just something to think about. It's just, you know, try not to, I think it's important not to basically solve the design problem for the students and let them do that. It's not about faculty, student design, it's about student design, and we're supposed to be kind of guides and advisors, you know, along the way. So having said that, we have about 15 minutes left. I just wanted to very quickly kind of summarize some of the comments that were received in the survey from our more experienced veteran instructors that replied to the survey. And I'm not going to read them all, but I highlighted some main points here. And I really like this first one here. You are not responsible for the success or failure of the project. I mean, we want to see success, but you can't do it for them. So we talked a little bit before about how to give them enough rope and not too much. The next one was the importance of having student teams meet regularly. And this person suggested at least every other week, and I would suggest that too. Interacting with the industry or the industry sponsor, and even I would add the faculty advisor, not to let things go too long before they're communicating, because then you can find out, if they wait a month to talk to you and there's a problem, perhaps you could have helped them and they could have saved some time on the project. Another person suggested that new instructors read some of the most referenced journal papers and look at what options there are, and then, you know, see what's been described. Will that work for you or will it not? And if it does, maybe talk to somebody that's done it. And if it hasn't worked, find out why. Maybe with some modifications it would work. And here in my notes, again, I referenced Susanna's papers because I think you can learn a lot from the papers, from the survey, the information that her surveys have uncovered. Also, try to attend professional society meetings. I mean, you've already taken the first correct step, and that's to come here today. This is you know, the only conference that's focused completely on capstone design. ASEE through the DEED division, there's a lot of people that get together there and are interested in design and capstone design. And I know in the Biomedical Engineering Society, where I'm a member, there's a group involved with design too. And I'm sure all the other engineering disciplines, professional societies probably have groups involved. So get involved with those. Another comment here was a team size should not be less than 3 or more than 5. I don't know if that's, I think that may be supported by research, and that's been my experience too. Anything less than 3, so 2 people, if one's a slacker, then one person has to do all the work. One of the questions in the chat was about, do you have teams with 1 person? I can say at Marquette we don't, because that to me is not really a team. And we're trying, built into our course learning objectives is learning how to work on a team, learning about teamwork. And 5, I've had projects with more than 5, and then you're inviting hitchhikers and slackers and couch potatoes and, you know, people that kind of ride the coattails of the rest of the team, and we don't want to do that. Let's see here. So that pretty much summarizes all those major, the comments that our veteran instructors have shared with us. One thing I'd like to mention before I turn it back to our panelists to kind of close this out is, let's see here. So with what's going, every university is in the process of deciding what they're going to be doing in the fall, whether their students are going to be live in the classroom, a hybrid, whatever. My suggestion would be for capstone instructors, I'm going to be doing this, is that I'm going to assume that everybody's going to have some component of online, of meetings, collaborative Zoom, Microsoft Teams, something like that. There's a lot of literature out there from people who've studied virtual teams in industry that we could, as capstone instructors, can learn from. And you might want to look through some of that and help, you know, teach your students how to function on a virtual team instead of just saying go do it. There are some great suggestions in there's books on project management that talk about virtual teams, and there's been research that's done on that too. So I think now it's particularly important to look at some of that and share that with your students. Okay, so in the last about 10 or 12 minutes, what I'd like to do is turn it back over to our panelists and have each of the panelists share one piece of important advice for new instructors. So of all the wonderful, you know, the great pieces of advice you have, just pick one, and you know, we have a little bit of time to expand on them. But if each of you could pick one piece of advice that you would share with new instructors. And Susanna, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm actually going to give 2 because there was one that was a question that's come up a couple times in the chat, continuing the diversity and inclusion theme about having a single person of a particular, you know, particular gender or particular ethnicity on a team. And I'm not super familiar with the research, but what I have read and what I've heard is that there is a concern about having singletons on a team. And so if there's a way for you to have people at least in pairs on a team, then that's better. Because a single person can end up getting pretty excluded. So if there's a way to avoid that, do try to do that. So that's sort of one piece of advice based on literature. And my advice for new capstone instructors is not be afraid to set a high bar for your students. And if you are providing a structure and a scaffold for them, you can afford to set a really high bar in terms of what they're able to accomplish. Capstone is a different sort of beast than a typical engineering course. They're accountable to you, to each other, but really to whoever the client is for the project. And they will want to deliver a really good experience and a good product. And this is a chance for them to have a pre-professional experience and a window into engineering practice. So it's very realistic for you to set a high bar and push them there, because I think that's something that's going to stick with them as they go forward into their careers.
Great. Okay, thank you. Renee.
If I were starting over, my advice would be sure to ask for help. Like there are so many resources out there, and it's such a community of sharing people that you can really make drastic improvements year to year just by listening and absorbing and improving the documents for your, or whatever information for your specific situation. And that's the part B of the advice would be, don't think it's going to fit perfectly. Every year is an improvement. So I've been, now this is what, 16 or 17 years of design, and every year I'm like, oh, I got to try this. Why didn't I do this before? And so I think that's the exciting part about teaching design, is it's just always this continuous process of making it better for your students and for the clients in the school. It's wonderful, but don't start with a blank page. We all want to help, and we'll share information and say, take it and modify it, do what you need to help you be happy and better.
Okay, thanks. Amy.
Similar to what Renee said, I would add on just the importance of networking with people. I can't tell you how many projects I've found just by luck, almost, from having talked to a lot of different people around campus or even off campus at like a robotics competition with other parents or something like that. When I was through networking, you find people lab equipment that you wouldn't expect to have available to you for your students to be able to test something with, or you have subject matter experts all of a sudden pop up that you could turn your teams to for help. So similar to what Renee said about asking for help, by networking, you identify a lot of people that are available to you for help when you need it later on.
Okay, thank you. Hang on one second. Sorry about that, but at least you know this is real, right? Okay, you do have a few more minutes. I just wanted to share one thing, and then also give me a little. I want to ask if Keith, and Megan, you've been monitoring the chat room. Are there any particular questions that kind of jump out that that the panel should address? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so I will take a look. But one thing I wanted to mention, we talked about how to form teams, and what we do at Marquette is we give students, they have to list their top 8 choices, but they're told any of these 8, you have to don't list something you can't live with, because you might get your 8th choice. Usually you get your within the top 3. And our course is a mix of mechanical, electrical, biomedical, and computer engineering students. So we tell, sometimes one thing that I've learned is that students a lot of times will say, hey, I want to be, we want to form a team. We have this great idea, we want to form a team. And I'll say, okay, well, who's on the team? Well, it's my roommate and my fraternity buddy and this person. And I'll say, well, just hang on. That's great. But, you know, you got to make sure you're working with people that you know will pull their weight, and people that share the same values as you do. If you all want to get an A in the class, and you've got a couple people that just care if they barely pass, that's going to cause conflict. So we had a situation like that, and that I had that conversation in August, and then in May, our dean was asking this one student, you know, what did you learn in capstone design? And he said, I learned that if I ever start my own company, I'm never going to hire friends or family. You realize you can't fire them. You know, it's very hard to do. So these are the kinds of things, you know, that again, these aren't really in the textbook, but these are great lessons that our students learn. And the last thing I'll mention is, after I've been teaching capstone for about 5 years, you know, we ask, when students list a project choice, we ask them, are there any qualifications you have, or any things you think you want to let me know about this? And somebody said, I'll work on any project, but I don't want to be on a team with Jane Doe. And then I saw Jane Doe's, and she said, I'll work on any project, but I don't want to be on a team with John Smith. So I asked around, and it turns out they were engaged, and he broke the engagement off. So by me knowing that information, perhaps I prevented a crime from being committed had I accidentally put them on the same team. So I really, for me, I think it's really important. We've had some really good results when we let students, you know, pick their teams, form teams, as long as they're using the appropriate criteria to pick team members. So with that, I'm taking a look at the questions here. And there's a question here regarding intellectual property on projects. You know, do you enable industry partners to own it, the students? That's not an easily answered question because every university has its own intellectual property policy. Where I am at Marquette, the students own their intellectual property, and they can sign agreements over, they can sign the rights over to companies, but it's voluntary, and if they don't want to, they'll have to work on a different project. But other universities have different policies, so it's going to be very difficult to answer that question here. But there are papers that have been written, you know, where people have surveyed those intellectual property policies. You might be able to find them. Okay.
Yeah, Jay, there was I posted something, this is Keith, on, you know, the balance of teaching the design process versus the design project. And students sometimes feel like there's really two projects. There's one for the class and then one that we got to do for our client. And those sometimes don't match up well.
Okay. Do you have any advice for how to deal with that?
I'm looking for advice.
Okay, well, maybe as our last question, I'll open it up to any of our panelists that might have a suggested way of dealing with that.
We have at Rose, we have a separate course for our biomedical engineers prior to capstone design that covers the process so that they practice on a project that doesn't end up with a product, but they have a practice zone and they learn about what the expectations for the capstone experience will be. So it's separate from capstone design.
Great. Okay.
I wish we had that at Smith, but we don't. And so we do the process at the same time. And there it is. And we learn how to do it. And it's complicated. But it becomes a really good source of conversation and discussion about the challenge of learning the process while simultaneously doing the process, while simultaneously adjusting the process to fit your project. And that becomes a good talking point, teaching point.
Okay. Well, seeing that we're about 2-3 minutes from the end of our session, first thing I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their wisdom and advice, and thank all the attendees for sharing your questions with us over the last couple of days, and for sending us so many other questions in the chat room. And like I said, the Google document will document all of these questions and comments that a lot of the veteran instructors have shared. Finally, I want to thank all the attendees also for attending. We really appreciate this. This was our first, as Keith said, our first virtual conference, and we're really pleased with the turnout. So I want to remind you that you can continue the discussion using our Slack channel. And Keith, I don't know if you want to add any more details about the Slack channel.
I think what we can do is we'll make sure that the Slack channel gets posted in the follow-up meeting minutes, the notes from this, and unless it's been, I don't know whether we've got that available right now where you can just post a link to it, but I think we can get to it as part of the follow-up.
Okay, great. All right, and the last, there I see a question here. Are the panelists willing to address side questions outside this panel? I'm pretty sure they are, yes. So somebody said they were very interested, Suzanne, in your 20-point team selection, your process. So if maybe you can find the question in the chat room and follow up. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. We're at noon, I guess 11:59, but we're just about at noon. So I think we're gonna end right here, and thanks again. And just a reminder, in a half hour is our next session. And that is Nifty Ideas and Surprising Flops. That will be facilitated by Susanna Howe. So with that, thank you.
Ciao. Great job, everybody.